Hi guys, welcome to my channel. This video will be about how to transition well from GCSE to A-levels and giving you all the tips that you need to help you prepare and also survive year 12 and year 13. So some of the tips that I'm going to provide you with will be in relation to what you can do before starting year 12 or maybe year 13, and some of which are going to be tips that you can do during the actual years studying A-levels. So I would say the first thing is to enjoy your summer after GCSEs. It's really important to have a break before you go into studying for your A-levels or anything of the sort, so BTECs or CTECs or any other further education qualification that you choose to take, but primarily this video will be focusing on taking A-levels. So one of the first things that I would always say is have a look at what your school already provides you as students. So for example, my school provided us with certain textbooks for certain subjects, and other subjects we would get nothing. For other subjects we'd get online platforms that we can also learn about and also submit like work and things like that through the platform. I'd really recommend using online platforms such as ChemGuide if you do chemistry, or finding a particular YouTuber that you love. And what you can do is learn and revise through these platforms, but also do a step-by-step like working out answers or like going through papers online, which I found to be really helpful because if I was somewhere remote or just basically anywhere, I could access all my learning through technology. And I feel like since like the pandemic, a lot of people have adapted to online learning and finding online platforms. So I feel like for a lot of you that might be quite easy to adapt to, or you might already have resources and materials that you can access on a virtual platform. And my next tip will be about revision techniques. So I know that a lot of people are trying to or do already use spaced repetition, which I feel like has been recently quite a trendy way to revise, but I find that spaced repetition didn't really work for me because it is based on a schedule and I felt like I couldn't really keep up with the schedule, so I just revised everything. And I would do it with like the old school revision methods, so I would use mind maps and flashcards that I would do when I'm actually studying the topic. So when it came to revision periods, I already had my mind maps and my revision cards for all my topics, which made it a lot easier, and it reduced a lot of the stress when I had to revise for these topics for my exams. So it means when it came to the end of the learning period and time for exams, I already had a whole bank and a whole box of basically loads of materials that I can access depending on how I feel at the time. So yes, I have mind maps and yes, I've made flashcards, but it meant that when it came to the crucial point of actually sitting my exam, so A-levels, I could actually pick on the night before or the few days before my official exam the style of learning that I want to revise from, whether it's flashcards or mind maps, which I found to be really helpful. And I also did this at GCSE as well. So I would also say get revision guides. So I had the CGP guides for biology and chemistry. Geography, at the time they didn't release it, but I had my own sources and resources for geography. But I really would stress to get revision guides because sure, textbooks are great, but when you are revising, you don't want to be revising from a textbook because there's just far too much information. And I think often we tend to think that we know less than what we actually know. So I remember there was a night in school where my friends and I, we just stayed, and for an hour we went through all the topics. I think it was actually all the topics in AS because we had just come back from the summer of year 12, and within the hour we went through all the pages and we tested each other on everything on every page. And then when we would answer, we would even give like additional information because of course these are revision guides and it's like a summary, so we also had the opportunity to expand, and we were like, we didn't even revise that much for what we were doing in that moment, and there's a lot of recall, that some of which we didn't even look over during the summer between year 12 and year 13. So we really surprised ourselves when we were doing that. So don't stress yourself out too much, just test yourself with what you know, and I would say do it with a friend because it makes it so much easier and so much more fun, and you can also learn from each other. And if somebody doesn't understand something, you can also help them. And they say one of the best ways that you learn yourself is when you teach other people. So I would 100% recommend that, because it saves you so much time, and also when you actually do it you feel so much less stressed. So I would really recommend that. One thing that I also lived by was to never leave the classroom without fully understanding everything that was taught. Now, of course, if there are some things that you do want to go and have a look at when you get back home, that's completely okay, but I would never leave the classroom if I didn't really understand something, or especially if I didn't understand like the main idea that was being taught. I started to do this in year 11, but I definitely did it during A-levels because I didn't have the time to teach myself a whole new idea at home, because I had so many other things going on. So I really made sure that I didn't leave until I knew, and if it meant that I had to stay behind for a little bit whilst the teacher explains it, I was all for that. And then it just was great because I could go home and look over it. Or generally what I would do is I would have already pre-read. I would come with questions if they weren't answered already in the lesson, and then if I was really unclear, I would ask and then go home and look over it some more, maybe do some questions, and then and then do that for every lesson. And that way I'm not behind, and then I'm staying on track with what school has, and often I would be a little bit ahead, so I know what to expect when I get in for my next lesson. Okay, my next tip is to print off the specifications. I did this in GCSE. The thing is with A-level specifications is that they're not as detailed as GCSE. They're very simple, and they don't have everything that you need to know. Whereas in GCSE, you can get the specifications and they could only ever ask you what's on the spec. But for A-level, it's very brief, and it doesn't include everything in terms of everything that you need to know for your exams. So don't just print it off and be like, oh, this is all I need to know for my exams. No, because it is a simplified version, but print it off and tick it off as you go along in terms of your own personal revision, and also by following what your school does as well, which I feel like is a really important thing to do, because my sister ended up doing her A-level exams for maths, and what our school did was they didn't even teach one or two of the topics, and those topics were inevitably in those exams, and her year group was obviously quite frustrated and quite angry because they didn't get taught those topics. And I feel like if you had maybe kept on top of things personally in terms of what you have gone through during school, you yourself can do the revision. But I'm just gonna hope that your schools don't do that to you, and that they do manage to finish the course in good time for your exams. But I just recommend going through the timelines of when you're going to be revising topics with your teachers, and just for your own self, to just make sure that you're on top of things as well. And if you can even be ahead, that's even better. The other thing was that when I first started, I kind of struggled doing past papers in year 12, especially at the beginning, because we hadn't learned a lot. So don't stress yourself out or feel like you need to straight away do exam papers, because you haven't learned all the content to be able to even do AS and especially A2 papers. So what I would say is that if you really wanted to answer questions, is go to one of your teachers and just ask for questions that are divided by topics. You can also find sources online that may have already got your exam board questions filtered by topic that you can work through as you learn those topics at school, which is what I did. And then as I learned a good few topics part of AS, I would then work through AS papers. And then when I transitioned to year 13 and learning about A2 content, I would do the full A-level papers. But just don't stress yourself out too much. But I do really see the value in doing questions, so maybe focus more on doing the questions in your textbooks, and then of course ask your teachers for any topic specific question. Okay, so you don't need to buy so many books, but I would recommend getting practical books, particularly for science, all your sciences. So I'll put a picture up here of some of the books that I used, which were really helpful in terms of doing the practicals, because sometimes it's not very clear what's happening at school, and often if you like miss a day where the practicals are being done, you don't really know what's going on, and the specifications have a very, very vague like program or idea in terms of how to do a practical, but just having the book helps with write-ups, and it actually explains why we do certain things in our practicals that often these questions don't even get asked during lesson time or during the practicals. So I would really recommend that. My next major tip is to avoid missing lessons. Do not miss lessons. I turned up to school pretty much every day. Even if there were some days that I felt a little bit ill, I would still make it into school. Why? Well, because what I felt when I missed school days was the fact that I missed multiple hours across all my subjects. So 4 to 5 hours worth of work that I need to catch up on. And sure, I can be sent slides, but that does not make up for the amazing conversations that happen within that lesson. Often when I get slides, I don't really understand what has been taught in that lesson, and there is so much value that I gain from the in-lesson talks that we have with our teacher in terms of further explanation of what's on the board or additional information that the teacher might have, which is beyond A-level, which again, for a topic like biology, going beyond the spec is so important, particularly if you do AQA where they have an essay section and you need to go beyond the spec for that part in particular. So a lot of these things are really important. If you do essay-based subjects, attending your lessons is so important again, because there's so much that you can gain from your teachers and peers during the conversations that are had in those lessons. So do try and attend lessons as much as possible, because catching up takes up and eats up your own personal time, and I for one never had the time really to spend on doing that. Okay, another tip is surround yourself with like-minded people. It makes it really hard to do what you want to do if you are with other people who are not on the same page as you in terms of studying and revision, and they might want to go out and party every weekend, which is fine if they can manage the workload, brilliant. But if you feel like that you would benefit from maybe going out less frequently and then putting more hours into studying, then do that. And it makes it a lot easier if you are surrounded by like-minded people. Again, for myself, I did have friends who went out a lot, but equally I had friends who were like me and would study and really put a lot of value and time and effort into the work that they did. And also I think because we had a common goal in mind, which was to get into a good university and to study a good degree, and to get there we needed to work hard and really make sure that we were excelling at the subjects. But also I think equally we found it really enjoyable and quite fun to study our subjects, which I think is the ultimate plus and win when you are studying A-levels. Okay, and finally, I just want you guys to remember and remind yourself that A-levels are not the be-all end-all. Try your best, work hard, think about the goal that you have in mind. So whether it's university or an apprenticeship or just not going into further education and starting in the world of work, all of which is completely okay and fine, and that you don't need to be sure exactly what you want to do post year 13. What you'll find is that during this period, not everybody is going to be on the same path like they would have been previously. And what I mean by that is, before everybody would follow through year 9, year 10, year 11, but really when you get to sixth form and when you leave year 13 in particular, or even when you're leaving year 11 going into year 12, that's the time when people are going to really pick their path, and that's where people differentiate the most, because you have a little bit more choice and freedom in terms of what you want to do and where you want to go. And I think it can also be quite a scary experience as well, thinking that maybe you might have to stay behind to resit in year 13 whilst all your friends go off to university, or you might feel like the choice that you've chosen isn't what everybody else is doing, but ultimately you know what's best for yourself, and I can only just suggest for you to do what makes you motivated and what you enjoy the most, and don't follow the crowd and the herd of people. For example, going to university, if that's generally what you're around. So I would say ultimately do what you feel like doing and that you would excel at, whether it's leaving school and doing something creative or fun, or something that you've always wanted to do, or entering academia and following on into university, and maybe even going beyond that and doing a master's and PhD in the far future. But ultimately, the main advice is to do what you love. I hope this video has helped. These are just some of the tips, some of the many tips that I've learned along the way through education, and also being a tutor myself and tutoring other people who are in year 10 all the way up to year 13. So I feel like I do understand a lot of the struggles that people go through when they're transitioning through the educational period. But I can only wish that you take the advice from this video, or at least some of the advice, and that you can make the best choice and decision for yourself when you are picking either your subjects or just purely going from year 11 to your next step. Also, please check out the videos that I have on my channel, which will be related to education, medicine and lifestyle. Okay guys, I hope all the tips and tricks in there were helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment or message me directly and I'll be happy to help.